On April 29, 2026, the United States Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that Louisiana's congressional voting map is an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. Justice Kagan called Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act all but a dead letter. On April 30th, 2026, Governor Jeff Landry suspended the May 16th primary, while 100,000 plus absentee ballots had already been mailed and 4,300 had been returned in East Baton Rouge alone. The same day, a federal lawsuit was filed and a just-elected black court clerk had his seat abolished, 25-11 along party lines. The deeper we go, the harder it gets to believe we're still talking about a real place. In the 10th place, Louisiana versus Calais delivered a shock that still reverberates through every branch of state government. On April 29, 2026, the United States Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that Louisiana's 2024 congressional map was an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. Justice Samuel Alito wrote for the majority, joined by Roberts, Thomas, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Kagan. The opinion declared that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act does not require a state to create additional majority-minority districts. It merely forbids a state from drawing a map that results in vote dilution through intentional racial discrimination. In her dissent, Justice Kagan warned that Section 2 was now all but a dead letter. The court's order set a strict timetable. Louisiana must submit a new congressional map by October 15, 2026, and secure final approval by November 1st, just days before the midterm elections. The ruling did not just redraw lines on a map, it set off a chain reaction, forcing the state to halt its primary, scramble its election calendar, and confront the limits of federal oversight. In a single decision, the Supreme Court placed the entire machinery of Louisiana's democracy into sudden and urgent motion. Number 9. Executive Order JML 26038 brought the machinery of democracy to a sudden halt on April 30th, 2026. With over 112,000 absentee ballots already mailed and 4,312 returned in East Baton Rouge alone, Governor Jeff Landry ordered the suspension of Louisiana's May 16th U.S. House primaries while voting was already underway. The order cited emergency powers under the state constitution and directed every parish registrar to stop processing ballots, post suspension notices at early voting sites, and mark all congressional votes as not to be tabulated. Early voting for other races pressed forward, but for U.S. House contests, the process simply froze. The Secretary of State's guidance confirmed that any votes cast for suspended races would not be counted, and that ballots still in the mail would be returned to sender. Lawsuits followed within 24 hours as voters and election officials challenged the governor's authority, but the courts upheld the suspension. On May 2nd, early voting began as scheduled, except for the races that had been erased midstream. For thousands of voters, the ballot they had already mailed was suddenly stripped of its most consequential choice. In 8th place, the erasure of Cleo Fields' congressional district put a human face on the cost of the Supreme Court's ruling. Cleo Fields, a fixture in Louisiana politics since the 1990s and one of only 2 black representatives in the state's delegation, found his district wiped from the map overnight. After the decision, Fields stood before reporters and delivered a line that cut through decades of legal argument. He said the line, "If you tell me I have to be white to serve in Congress from Louisiana, I can't do nothing about that." His words carried the weight of a career spent fighting for voting rights and fair representation. Fields' district, drawn to reflect the black voting population, was dissolved as the court's new standard took hold, with no requirement for a majority-minority seat and just a prohibition on intentional discrimination. For Fields, the loss was not just political, but deeply personal. It meant the end of a legacy built on the promise of the Voting Rights Act and it left thousands of voters without the representative they had chosen. The abrupt disappearance of his district stands as a stark reminder that institutional changes ripple out to real people, altering the landscape of power, belonging, and voice in ways that no court order can fully explain. Number 7. The story of Calvin Duncan stands as a stark lesson in the fragility of democratic outcomes in Louisiana. In December 2025, Duncan, a black man exonerated after nearly 30 years in prison, won a parish-wide election for Orleans Parish Criminal Court clerk. The victory was decisive, certified by the Secretary of State, and celebrated as a milestone for both criminal justice reform and black political representation. On April 21, 2026, Duncan took the oath of office. 9 days later, the Louisiana Senate, acting on Senate Bill 256, voted 25-11 to abolish the very office he had just assumed. The bill, sponsored by Senator Jay Morris, transferred all duties and records to the civil clerk's office, erasing the position and the will of the voters in a single legislative act. On the same day, Duncan filed a federal civil rights lawsuit, arguing that the legislature's move retroactively stripped the electorate of its right to choose their officials. The sequence, election in December, oath in April, and abolition by the end of the month, unfolded with clinical speed. Duncan's case now sits in federal court, a living record of how quickly a democratic result can be nullified by legislative decree. In this moment, the machinery of representation is not just redrawn, it is erased, leaving behind a lawsuit and a warning about the reach of political power. Number 6. House Bill 804 marks a decisive turn in Louisiana's battle over climate accountability. Sponsored by Representative Brett Gayman, the bill was born from a work group convened at the request of oil and gas executives who warned that a flood of climate lawsuits threatened the state's economic foundation. The measure moved through the legislature with striking speed and unity, clearing the House Natural Resources Committee on April 24, 2026, with a unanimous 10-0 vote and passing the full House 92-2 just 3 days later. In the Senate, the bill again met no resistance in committee and sailed through the chamber 84-10 before being signed into law on May 12, 2026. At the heart of House Bill 804 is a sweeping shield. It prohibits any civil, criminal, or administrative action seeking to hold oil or gas producers liable for damages tied to climate change, global warming, or sea level rise. During floor debate, Gayman made the stakes explicit. The Chevron verdict of $745 million last year illustrates how massive judgments can cripple state resources. This bill is our preemptive safeguard. That 2024 jury award against Chevron for coastal erosion sent shockwaves through both industry and government, prompting lawmakers to act before another such verdict could land. The bill's language mirrors national efforts to block climate litigation, but in Louisiana, the move lands as a direct counterpunch to rising environmental risk. As coastal loss accelerates and storm threats grow, the legislature's answer is not stricter oversight, but legal insulation for the state's most powerful industry. House Bill 804 stands as a legislative fortress, built brick by brick in committee rooms and on the House floor, with its origin, sponsor, and unanimous committee support all on the record. In a session defined by institutional upheaval, this law draws a sharp line, protecting corporate interests at the very moment environmental vulnerability is reaching new heights. Number 5. The home insurance market in Louisiana has reached a breaking point. For many families, the shock is immediate and personal. A Cameron Parish household now faces a $19,000 annual premium. up from $5,800 just 3 years ago. Across the state, the average cost of home insurance has soared by 164% since Hurricane Ida. That kind of increase is not just a statistic. It is a monthly bill that rivals a mortgage, pushing budgets to the brink. The crisis is not limited to rising prices. Since 2022, 11 insurance carriers have either gone insolvent or pulled out of Louisiana, leaving homeowners with fewer and fewer options. The state's last resort insurer, Louisiana Citizens, has seen its filings spike as private carriers exit, yet even Citizens cannot keep pace with the demand. The result is a growing population of uninsured homeowners, now at 12%, more than double the rate from just a few years ago. For some, the choice is stark: pay the premium or risk losing coverage entirely. 3 out of 5 households spend more than 10% of their income on home insurance. For those with mortgages, the lack of affordable coverage means lenders may declare the loan in default, putting homes at risk of foreclosure. Louisiana Insurance Commissioner Tim Temple calls it the biggest crisis our state faces. The collapse of the insurance market is not a distant policy debate, it is a daily reality for thousands, reshaping what it means to own a home in Louisiana. Number 4. The vanishing coastline of Louisiana is a crisis measured not in years or even months, but in minutes. According to the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority and NOAA, the state loses the equivalent of a football field of land every 100 minutes. This is not a metaphor. It is a physical reality that reshapes maps and redraws boundaries in real time. Saltwater intrusion, canal dredging, and subsiding marshes combine with rising seas and stronger storms to erase whole communities. Since the 1930s, nearly 2,000 square miles of land have disappeared into the Gulf of Mexico. In Plaquemines and Terrebonne parishes, entire cemeteries now sit offshore, their headstones battered by waves. Each hurricane season, the pace of loss accelerates. The land that once buffered cities from storms is now open water, leaving places like New Orleans and Houma more exposed with every passing year. Insurance companies factor this relentless erosion into their risk models, driving up premiums and forcing some carriers to pull out entirely. For homeowners, the consequences are immediate: higher bills, shrinking property lines, and the looming threat of forced relocation. At the policy level, the rapid disappearance of land complicates efforts to assign responsibility for damages, fueling debates over who should pay for restoration or retreat. The loss of a football field every 100 minutes is more than a statistic. It is the ground truth beneath every legal, economic, and political battle over Louisiana's future. In this landscape, the stakes of climate legislation, insurance reform, and court decisions are measured in acres lost, homes threatened, and the slow retreat of a state toward the sea. Number 3. The campaign to redraw Louisiana's courts has unfolded with the force of a legislative blitz, reshaping the state's judicial map in a matter of weeks. In the spring of 2026, lawmakers introduced a series of bills to overhaul judicial districts across the state. Committee agendas filled with proposals to merge courts, eliminate judgeships, and redraw boundaries from New Orleans to rural parishes. Hearings ran late into the evening as legislators debated the future of local justice, sometimes with little explanation beyond the text of the bills themselves. In one Judiciary Committee session, Senator Jay Morris was pressed on the logic behind eliminating 10 Orleans parish judgeships. Was there a study showing declining caseloads? Any evidence of inefficiency or cost savings? Morris responded with a single word, delivered flatly into the microphone. So? The silence that followed captured the mood of the moment. An entire branch of government remade without pretense of justification. The transcript records the exchange in full, but the impact was felt far beyond the hearing room. Across Louisiana, dozens of new district maps were drafted, debated, and advanced, each one shifting the lines of authority and the balance of power in ways both subtle and sweeping. For some, this was long overdue reform. For others, it was a naked consolidation of political control. The pace and scale of the changes left little room for public input or judicial review. In the space of a single legislative session, the ground beneath Louisiana's courts shifted, sometimes explained, sometimes not at all. In an era of institutional upheaval, the judiciary became just one more pillar to be rearranged. The question left hanging after Morris's "so" is how far and how fast the system can be remade before the meaning of justice itself is up for negotiation. Number 2. The accumulation of power by Governor Jeff Landry stands at the center of Louisiana's institutional upheaval. In the span of a single legislative session, Landry's administration has driven or endorsed nearly every major move reshaping the state's courts, elections, and regulatory landscape. His executive order on April 30th, 2026 suspended the United States House primaries, while voting was already underway, invoking emergency authority under the state constitution and halting the process in its tracks. But the order was only the most visible act in a broader campaign. Landry's public statements and press releases reveal a governor not just reacting to crisis, but orchestrating change across multiple fronts. He threw his support behind House Bill 804, the Energy Protection Act, which shields oil and gas producers from climate-related lawsuits, a measure crafted in close consultation with industry leaders. In the same breath, Landry's office backed a wave of oversight rollbacks, including proposals to transfer voter data to federal agencies and to restrict public access to campaign donor information. Each initiative carries his imprint, whether through direct sponsorship, public endorsement, or behind-the-scenes negotiation. The web of influence extends to the legislature. Senate Bill 256, which erased the office of a just-elected black court clerk, was introduced on behalf of Governor Landry, according to the bill's authors. Efforts to redraw judicial districts, eliminate judgeships, and consolidate court offices all advanced with the governor's blessing. The pattern is unmistakable. A string of executive orders, legislative sponsorships, and regulatory proposals converging under a single administration. In press conferences, Landry has framed these moves as necessary to protect Louisiana's unique cultural heritage and to ensure that every Louisianan's voice is heard. Yet the cumulative effect is a concentration of authority that reaches into every branch of government. One set of hands now guides the machinery of democracy, industry, and justice, redrawing boundaries and rules at a pace rarely seen in modern state politics. The convergence of these actions is not accidental. It is the product of deliberate coordination, with Governor Landry at its center. And finally, in first place, a single pattern emerges from the chaos, a pattern that binds together the courts, the ballot box, the insurance market, and the very ground beneath Louisiana's feet. Over the course of just weeks, each pillar of public life has been struck, not by accident or distant forces, but by deliberate acts within the same legislative session, under the same State House dome. The Supreme Court's decision in Louisiana versus Calais did not simply redraw a congressional map. It set off a chain reaction, forcing the state to suspend a primary even as ballots lay unopened in mailrooms. The governor's executive order, JML 26038, froze democracy midstream, leaving thousands of voters with ballots that would never count. At the same time, the legislature erased the office of a just-elected black court clerk, Calvin Duncan, with a bill introduced on behalf of the administration and a single word, "so," standing in for justification. House Bill 804, written in the shadow of a $745 million verdict against Chevron, granted oil and gas companies legal immunity from climate lawsuits, even as Louisiana lost a football field of land every 100 minutes and insurance premiums soared beyond the reach of ordinary families. 11 insurers have gone under or left the state since 2022. 12% of homeowners now live without coverage. The courts are redrawn, judicial seats erased, voting rules rewritten, accountability measures stripped away, and public protections weakened, all in the space of a single session. Each move, on its own, might seem a product of crisis or necessity. Taken together, they reveal a coordinated transformation, a realignment of power and risk, where the lines between law, politics, and commerce blur. The old guardrails, federal oversight, judicial review, market regulation, are being lifted in tandem. For Louisiana, the extraordinary and the devastating are no longer isolated events. Everything is happening at the same time in the same state, under the same sky. Across all 25 upheavals, one pattern stands out. In Louisiana, rules, rights, and risks are being rewritten in real time. Power does not shift quietly here. It redraws maps, suspends elections, and decides whose nightmare matters. The scale is staggering, the stakes immediate. Louisiana is not just weathering a storm. It is revealing what happens when the foundations of democracy and daily life are renegotiated at once.